back to this year's Beetlegust project. This is the third video over this project. I am working on the sandworm scene, the Saturn sandworm scene from the original Beetlejuice movie. If you're new to my channel, Beetlegust means Beetlejuice themed videos all August long. Today's project is actually a little tiny hallway and a door. In the scene that I'm referencing, Barbara and Adam fall into Saturn and they're trying to get back into their house. There's like a double doorway hallway, so there's a door on the front, and then once they get back into their house, there's like a door off to the left. And that is the hallway that I'm going to be recreating. Now, the majority of this house is Delia. There's just Delia everywhere. She has taken over the entire house, inside and out, and this is one area that I'm going to keep very Barbara focused. I wanted to have that old farmhouse feel like you saw when the Maitlands were living there. There's only a few other places that get to keep this feel, and it's going to be Charles' study, which I haven't worked on yet, and the attic, which I haven't worked on yet. So I'm very excited to make a different style of house within this project. You may remember my original mock-up when I was first trying to figure out this whole project. I did a cardboard box with mirrors all around, and the idea behind this is that the door will look like it's floating while still having a hallway that looks like it's like going into another dimension on the inside. But I'm not sure how sturdy this cardboard hallway would be, and the mirror paper is kind of rippled, so it kind of ruins the effect. So now we're going to make the actual hallway a little sturdier with better mirror paper, and I'm just hoping it still works as well as it did when I did my first mock-up. So let's get started. Off camera, I went ahead and cut out the walls from some very thin plywood to match the shapes that I had already figured out for my cardboard room. And I will be making the door a little later on. But here's all of my pieces. As you can see, one of them has a hole in the back, and that's because I know I'm going to need some lighting in this room, and I don't want to have to drill into my piece later. I had this wallpaper left over from my Fairfield project, and it has lots of little flowers on it, which I figured Barbara would really like, so I'm going to try and use this, even though it's not quite tall enough for my hallway, but I think I can make it work. The key here is going to be knowing where I don't need wallpaper so I can conserve the rest of it. I could scan it and print it, but it's going to be very hard to match the original colors. I printed these a long time ago with a printer I don't have anymore. Once I have all of the pieces I need laid out, I'm going to be using my Yes paste and an old library card to apply the paper to the board. Ever since doing my wallpaper video, this has become my favorite way to apply wallpaper in any situation, and there are never any bumps in the end. So I'm going with Yes paste every time, as long as I can. Thankfully, this was a striped wallpaper, so it was very easy to make sure that I was cutting it straight, and then I could just line up the pattern with the straight lines vertically as I was putting individual pieces together. The piece that you see that's missing out of the one that's closest to the camera, that's going to be covered by a door, so no one will ever know that the wallpaper is not there. And that's the same situation with the one that's farthest away from the camera. That area is also going to be covered by a door. Now that everything's applied and dry, I can remove any of the excess paper, and I have my panels ready to go together. And this process was a good example of blood, sweat, and tears going into each individual miniature project, because as I was making sure my paper was lined up, I got a large cut in the end of my thumb, which is just a very bad place to get a paper cut, and it ended up getting blood on several parts of this project. Thankfully, it's a busy wallpaper design. And yes, there's blood on the masking tape, and anyway, so sorry if you're squeamish, but it happens. And a little dab here on the wallpaper. Thankfully, it came off pretty well, but we're moving forward. To prep for putting this piece together, I added masking tape to the edges of the back and front panels, and then I added glue to each edge. And as the walls go into place, I can simply put the masking tape up and over that edge. There's blood and glue everywhere! I promise once I got these walls together, I did do a little first aid and made sure that my thumb was okay before I continued on with this project. However, sometimes I just get a little impatient and I want to finish something up before I do the necessities, which would be probably stop the bleeding. To let everything dry, I placed it on top of my mat that has a grid on it so I could try to get it as centered as possible. I did not succeed in this. You will see throughout the video that they are not even on the sides, but that's okay. Hopefully in the end that won't cause too many issues with my mirrors. I'm going to be using cardboard for my floor because I do need to keep this hallway as lightweight as possible. It is going to be glued onto the back wall and basically suspended in space, so keeping the materials light is really important. I did not do this with the outer walls because I wanted them to have strength and be very rigid when I start putting my mirrors up against the outside walls. So the whole thing is just going to be a mixture of materials, whatever works for that purpose. When it came to the flooring, I couldn't help but add a checkered floor. I think every room in the netherworld, except for maybe Juno's office, has a checkered floor, and so I couldn't help but put this in the hallway. Even though it's not part of the netherworld, the hallway is supposed to be in the Maitland's house. This is just a thin sheet of scrapbook paper, so I'm first adding it to some poster board. This will counteract any of the ripples that you might see if you just put thin paper on top of cardboard. And then I'm going to be using my Yes Paste to apply the checker floor that is applied to poster board first. So it's a layer of paper, then poster board, then cardboard, and that's going to be all of the pieces for my floor. I'm letting that dry completely before I cut off the exterior edges and try putting it inside of my hallway. Although before doing that, I did decide to use some chalk pastel to make the white tiles a bit more brown. I want to keep everything that's inside of the hallway a more brown, warm cream tone that really speaks farmhouse, and so I do want the checkers to be there, but I still want them to read as part of the Maitland house and not as part of the netherworld. So I added some chalk pastel, rubbed it into the paper, and as you can see, it's going to go a little bit better with the brown paper. Now that all of that is done, I can glue it in place inside of the hallway. I'm just adding a little bit of wood glue around the bottom edge, and then I can push the floor up through the bottom. And because it doesn't really have to hold any weight, there's not going to be any furniture in here, there's not going to be any dolls in here, everything's mostly going to be stuck to the wall. I don't have to worry about how structurally sound my floor is, it just has to be there. While that's drying, I do want to work on my doors. Now I have made doors before, so I am going to kind of speed through this process. I have a whole hallway full of doors in the netherworld scene. I will link that down below if you want to see how I make some of these doors that are mostly false doors that just kind of stick up against the wall. That video has several patterns and techniques that you can try out if you want to make your own doors. This door was specifically modeled off of the one in the movie. It has these open windows at the top and then the paneling down the front. So I used 2 layers of mat board and 1 layer of chipboard because it's just a little bit thinner than mat board, and I'm going to let that dry. I made a matching yet skinnier door that's going to go on the inside of my hallway. This is always going to be seen at an angle, so it's okay for it to be slightly thinner. It will be hard to tell. I mean, those who are really staring at it will probably be able to tell. I wanted it to look similar, but it's just going to fit so much easier inside of the space if it's thinner. While my doors dry, I can go back to my hallway floor. Because I put so much chalk pastel on there, I did want to seal it with Mod Podge. This is the only spot that I'm going to seal with Mod Podge, but I'm going to let that dry while I continue on the doors. Sanding down the edges is going to make them look more like one piece instead of a creation of several panels. And then it's also going to give the main door that you're going to see at the front a more worn, rounded edge. And then everything is going to be painted in a bright white. As you can see here, it's almost glowing in the camera because my exposure is up just a little bit too high. But I made sure to hit all the edges of the doors. And then the door on the inside is also going to need a trim that goes around it. The outside door, I don't need like a separate piece of trim because the outside of the hallway room box is the trim for that door. But I had to create a separate one for the interior. Speaking of the exterior trim, we're going to work on that now. I first need to remove the masking tape to make sure that it's not underneath the trim when I add it on. The first layer of the trim is a piece of mat board that's cut to the exact same size as the plywood. I'm just going to glue that on top of the plywood, and then I'm adding a single piece at the top. This matches the screen reference of the door that we see in the movie. And now I'm going to awkwardly pile my 1, 2, 3 blocks on top to make sure everything dries flat. Once it is dry, I can use a sanding stick to make everything blend together, the plywood and the mat board, so that I have one piece that looks like a finished piece of trim for the door. And you'll be able to see how this all comes together once I start adding the white paint. When you see the door just hanging there on Saturn, it really does just look like a door frame with a door. So getting the door frame right was really important. And I do like how it comes out in the end. I also wanted to add a very shallow platform on the front of the door, and this is to hide the fact that my floor wasn't glued exactly flat, so it's going to hide that edge. And then in the movie, Barbara and Adam do jump on a ledge of the door, so I wanted to add that in just as something that I did notice while I was watching this scene. So here is my final door frame. I do really like the contrast between the white doors and the white trim and the brown on the interior. However, I do decide to age the door up a bit, and I do think that the yellowy brown aging that I'm doing now will blend really well with the yellow sand that's going to be added into this scene at a later date. I think this process really does give it that old feel, the old farmhouse feel where the door has been opened 20 times in a day as members of the family were going in and out to the outside trying to do things, get chores done. So I'm very happy with this part of the door process. And of course I had to do the same thing to the door frames wherever I thought there would be some wear and tear. But now we can finally get to something that's a little bit more exciting. We can actually add a door inside of the hallway and give it a little bit more character inside of there. And we can start to cover up those areas where there is no wallpaper. I am using my 1, 2, 3 blocks on this to make sure it dries as flat to the wall as possible. It's because the door was fairly thin and was wanting to warp, but once that's in place, I can add my trim, and so now we have a door inside of the hallway. It is going to be a little bit difficult to see. You're going to have to be very far to the right of the room in order to see the door that's back there. And if you're wondering what's going in those windows, I am going to be making some small drapes that are going to cover up the fact that there's nothing behind the door. And even though the bigger door is painted and put together, it's not going to be going in until a later date. First, I need to add some trim. Even though this is going to be kind of a momentary glimpse, I do want to make it look as good as possible, so I am going to be adding baseboards and crown molding into this space to make sure it does really look like a finished hallway. I'm just using a single layer of mat board. I painted it to match the color, and I'm going to add it around the bottom of my hallway space. I can't add my crown molding in place yet because I do not have a ceiling, so I need to make that now. The space that I have above the doorway trim is just a little bit too shallow for even a single layer of cardboard, so instead I'm going to be using a layer of mat board to create my ceiling. I first dry fit it into place, and then I did realize I could use a second layer of mat board and still have the space that I needed, so I doubled up my mat board to give it strength. I'm also going to be using a layer of poster board for my ceiling surface, and I'm pre-painting that with white acrylic paint so it matches all of the rest of the whites in the space. This is also an important step because when I add the chalk pastel, the acrylic paint surface is going to grab onto the chalk pastel different than a matte board surface would. So if I want it to look similar to the painted trim, the painted crown molding, I needed to paint my ceiling, even if all the materials I'm using are already white. So I glued my white painted poster board to the bottom of my matte board pieces, and finally I had a ceiling that was painted and worked with the rest of my hallway. I'm still not gluing it in just yet because I did realize I need to work on my door window panels. They're going to be a little bit easier to work on without a ceiling there. So I took one of the openings that were my door windows and I'm tracing that onto a piece of poster board, which is much thinner than mat board. I'm cutting it out slightly thinner and slightly shorter than my traced piece. And that's because I want to be able to wrap my fabric around this piece before I put it into the opening in my door. I cut out a strip of fabric that's twice the width of my rectangle, and I'm going to add quite a bit of glue to the surface. While the glue is still wet, I'm accordion folding my fabric, and then I'm going to press it onto the face of my poster board so that the fabric sticks into the tacky glue. Before the glue dries completely, I can kind of play around with the folds and figure out if I like how it looks. Now, I was trying to center it, however you can see one side is much longer than the other side. I do manage to make it work. It would have been a little bit better if it was more centered, but once I had everything looking the way I wanted, I put it under a 1-2-3 block to dry. Now you can see how this is going to fit inside of my door opening. And this is also why, as you can see, it's easier to do this without a ceiling on my door because this is such an extreme angle in a small space. I made 2 of these, one for each panel, and I can go ahead and glue them in place so that they are permanent and block out the fact that there is no room behind this door. Now that those are completed, I can add in my ceiling and not worry about not being able to reach parts of this room. This is the exact same process as when I added the floor. I'm just adding glue around the top edge and then carefully pushing it into place so that I have a completed ceiling. And now that the ceiling is in there, I can move on to my crown molding, which I'm going to do the same as the baseboards, so we'll speed through that. And here you can see the crown molding and the baseboards are done. And we have one more spot that's not covered with wallpaper, but that will be covered by the door once it's installed. So at this moment, it's looking pretty good. And of course, we can't forget the chalk pastel to match the rest of the door frame and the rest of everything else we have created. The last thing we need to install for this space is going to be the big door, which is the front door, which is the one that we see in the movie. But I need to do a few things to this door before we can permanently glue it in. Because this door faces the outside, it is going to need a piece of glass. So I'm using a piece of acetate to emulate glass, and I'm going to glue that on with some super glue so it takes hold to the plastic. While that's drying, I can work on some more drapes for this door. They're going to have a matching set of drapes. However, I can make one long drape instead of 2 separate drapes. So I made a larger poster board piece. I followed the same process of accordion folding the fabric and putting it into glue. However, this time I don't have to fold it over the poster board, so I just added some glue to the edge and I'm going to cut it off once the glue is dry. This is keeping down some of the bulk and you won't see the edges, so it doesn't really matter. I'm installing it right behind my window and I can't really glue it to the plastic very well. I'm going to attempt to, but I did need to make sure that it overlapped on the mat board somewhere so that I could trust that it was going to hold over the years. Because if that fabric drops down behind the door, it's going to take quite a bit of work to get it back out and glue it back in place. So I am going to double up my gluing with a little bit of hot glue just to make sure all of my bases are covered. I am an overgluer, I know that, and I'm proud of it. Very rarely does anything that I glue fall apart. Now there is one more thing you might be noticing is missing from this door, and it's something that I often forget. I can't tell you how many times I've forgotten to put a doorknob on a door. So we are going to go ahead before I forget and make both doorknobs for both doors. And I have these little mini pony beads. I don't know if they're still referred to as pony beads. They're in a collection of beads from over the years, things that my daughter has no longer wanted. They're so small and they work perfect on the end of a Q-tip. So these are going to be some very easy DIY doorknobs. I'm first going to add some glue inside of the plastic pony beads, and then I cut a very small section of Q-tip and I'm going to press that inside of the pony bead. It's probably about 3/8, maybe a 1/4 inch of Q-tip, maybe 3/8 inch, just kind of depends on how far you want your doorknob to stick out. And then I'm going to be using 2 1/4 inch hole punches per doorknob. I'm gluing them together just to make them a little bit stronger. And then once those are glued together, I'm going to glue the opposite end of the Q-tip that's not inside of the bead on top of the circle. And this is going to make my doorknob that's going to be glued up against the door. Very easy, very quick way to make doorknobs. I wish I knew like what to call these. Are these mini pony beads? If anyone's in the bead world and knows where to find these, I would love to buy several more bags of these. So now I'm going to paint these. I'm going to be using a silver. It's an Army Painter silver, and I just couldn't help myself. It looked like 2 little eyes looking up at me, so I had to draw a smiley face. This is a very opaque silver paint. I am loving this paint. I'm going to buy more of it once I run out. It makes a very quick job of painting these doorknobs, so I'm going to let those dry. And then I can pull them off of my masking tape. Maybe this is a little vicious now that he has a smiley face, but I do need them for my doors, and I think they look pretty realistic, honestly, even with the end of the Q-tip kind of looking like a keyhole. They can now be glued directly onto the doors. I'm going to glue it onto the door that's not yet installed, and then carefully glue it onto the door that is in the room, making sure I get it in a similar spot. And then I can move on to the final installation of the big door, which is a little tricky because I do want it to be partially open. Like I want it, well, it is open, but I mean partially, like I want it to be at an angle. So I decided to glue a piece of mat board to the back, which will make it pop away from the side wall. So it looks kind of like this. However, I did feel like it was still just a little bit too flat for my liking. So I glued on a slightly longer piece of mat board to push it out even further. And I feel like this has just the right amount of door open. And so this is what I'm going with. To glue the front edge of my door, I was just going to glue it to the edge of my door frame, but it was a little bit hard when I was dry fitting it, so I decided to add 2 pieces inside of the door frame, kind of where the hinges of the door would be, and that's where I'm going to add glue, along with the edge of mat board that's on the inside. So there's really 3 points where this door is glued to the wall. And that concludes putting together our basic pieces for the Maitland hallway to save them from Saturn. So now that I have the hallway built, I have the doors constructed and installed, and I'm happy with how everything's looking as far as like the architecture of the room, it's time to add some details. I want to add just a little bit of a nod to Barbara on the inside back wall, and I want to add some lighting inside of the space. You may remember this little hole in the back wall that I wallpapered over at the beginning of this video. That is going to come in handy because I'm going to do something similar I did in Flat Stanley's space on another side of this project. I'm going to make a fake bulb that's just kind of hanging down with an LED in the wall behind it. So let's get started on those things. There's another part of the Beetlejuice movie that I want to reference in this hallway. So there's a scene where Barbara realizes that they're ghosts and holds up some horses in front of a mirror, and they're invisible. The ghosts are invisible. So I wanted to add a horse and a mirror into this scene. Now I did order some horses online, but they were way too big, which I'm so bummed about. So I'm going to try and find another way to add a horse without having to sculpt it, because sculpting a horse just sounds mind-boggling to me, especially in that small scale. I've had these drink charms on my shelf for a very long time, super long time. I got them for 25 cents in a garage sale. Now I do have a horse that I could use, but I'm not sure I want to use it in this space. It's a really nice miniature, and also I did realize it was broken. So I'm going to look through these drink charms to see if I can find a horse. There's so many different types of animals, but of course, there's no horse. There's a donkey, there's a camel, there's a giraffe. Randomly, there's a mermaid, but is there a horse? No. I did find a camel, which is kind of the horse of the desert, right? And I thought it would be funny if I used a camel instead of a horse, because I'm about to put so much sand into this scene. Here you can see the original horse that I had. His little leg is broken off. I do have the leg, so I can fix it, but they're about the same size, so I'm going to go ahead and build the mirror that fits either one of these. And if I decide to use a camel as kind of like an inside joke to myself, then I have it, and if not, I'll use the horse. This mirror is going to be made out of 2 layers of mat board, so I'm first cutting those to size. I'm using my camel to decide where the shelf is going to sit that he's going to stand on and where I'm going to place the mirror. I kind of sloppily figured out where the center of the board is going to be, and I'm going to use an oval shape to figure out the shape of my mirror. I'm going to carefully cut that out with a sharp craft knife so that I'm left with an oval opening, and I will be putting some mirror paper behind that opening to create the mirror. Before I do that, I do need to sand the edges, although I do have a plan to put some trim around the edge so it will cover up that I didn't do a perfect job cutting it out. Now that I have my 2 main pieces for the structure figured out, I can start adding the details like the shelf that the animal, either camel or horse, is going to sit on. I'm adding quite a bit of glue because if I do use the horse, which is probably the most likely, it is a heavy miniature, it is pure metal, so I want to make sure that it stays on there. I also added a small triangular shelf support underneath. This neon piece of green trim is what I thought would work well around the mirror area. I'm going to add quite a bit of wood glue around the oval shape so it has a lot of glue to hold onto the trim. I really don't know what material this is made out of, so I don't know how easily it will stick. But I'm going to start at the bottom because that's where it's going to be covered up by something on the shelf, and just slowly go around the oval, very slowly, trying to make sure I line it up as best as I can. Once I get to the bottom, I'm just going to let everything lay there before I cut it off so it can dry, and then once everything's dry, I can cut off the excess trim. I didn't line it up perfectly, but as I said, it's going to be covered up, so I'm not worried about it too much. I traced the oval onto the back panel of the mirror, and I'm going to cut one of my scrap pieces of mirror paper to fit that size. It has a sticky back, and it usually comes out rippled, which is okay with me because I don't want a perfect reflection in this mirror. The mirror paper does have a thickness to it, so to make up for that and make sure I have a flat area to glue my upper piece on, I'm just adding some cardstock around the edges, around the outside of the mirror paper. And then once I remove my protective coating, I'm free to glue this piece on top of the back. Now I did realize, I should probably paint this trim before I add the mirror, otherwise it's going to be quite a mess. And then I also needed to paint the back of the trim because it's neon green all over and that would reflect in the mirror. So once I got a base coat of white onto the trim, I was able to add glue and glue these 2 pieces together to create a complete mirror. What do you want to call it? A mirror frame? Just like a fun little, it's supposed to be one of those mirrors that you check your hair before you're leaving the house. That was kind of the idea behind it. Something that has just a little trinket shelf on there so you can put your keys or your horse on it. Once the glue dried, I painted everything else with that same white paint, and then of course I had to use my chalk pastel to match the feeling of the rest of the room. I used the same yellowy brown that I used on the trim, but then I also used a darker brown to fill in that braid that went around the edge of the mirror. So here is my final mirror. You will see some scratches on the mirror surface, and that is because I got some chalk pastel on there and then tried to clean it, but I'm not worried about a reflection, so it's okay. So back to this little spot in the wallpaper where the light is going to go. I need to coordinate where my mirror is being hung and where that light is going to exist inside of the room. I decided to go ahead and cut the hole for the LED light, even though I'm not working on lighting until the next video. This is going to help me see where everything is going to sit inside of the room so I don't accidentally glue a miniature over the spot where the light needs to be. I will make sure to reinforce this paper around the light in the next video once I get everything in place. Now, in the meantime, I just could not paint the camel. So off screen, I did a really quick paint job, and I tried to do it kind of like the Breyer horses. I had friends who had Breyer horses, I don't know, and they always seem like really yellowy to me, which works for the space because of the yellow sand. So I just had to try it out. I don't think I'm going to end up using the camel, but I thought it was fun and it really fit on this shelf. So in the future, I might try to paint some more of these drink markers. And when I first did this, I was going to have y'all vote whether you wanted the camel or the horse. But once you see everything together, I think you're all going to think the horse is the right fit, especially for Barbara. This is Barbara's space, not the space for me to have like my camel jokes. So we'll save the camel jokes for another project. For the light fixture that I mentioned, I was just going to make a hanging bulb because that's what you see in the movie. It's just a blank bulb hanging down. But then I decided to make something a little bit nicer. So I found this hurricane lamp cover in my collection and I thought I could use that. And so I'm making a bunch of different bead pieces that are going to go together. And originally I put these little clear beads because they could fit inside the hurricane lamp and hold it in place. But then it just felt way too long and kind of weird. I found this smaller, more like a fishbowl shape and decided that fit the size of the lamp that I needed a bit better. And so I'm going to use that instead. So this is just little pieces of mat board with some beads glued on the top and the bottom with a glass piece in the center. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason. I just kind of played around with the individual pieces until I liked the shape and the look of the light fixture. Once I had painted the mat board and the beads, I could glue the glass piece in place, and one of the sides didn't glue, well, it didn't have enough flat surface, so I used a bit of string. I wrapped it around the edge of the glass with just an extra bit of glue to help hold it in place. Again, I'm an over gluer. I want to make sure everything is going to stay for years and years. And so here is my little light fixture, which of course also needs to be aged. I did a dark wash to get into all of the details. And then on top of that, I did a dry brush of white paint just to kind of blend it in with all of the white paint that's in the details and the architecture of the room. Because I still have to add the lighting, I don't want to glue any of these pieces in place permanently. So right now they are just museum waxed in place, so you can get the idea of how they might look. So now that the room is built, we have details on the inside, I have a lighting fixture on the inside. It's time to add the mirrors and figure out how this is all going to be incorporated into the scene that I've been working on since the beginning of this month. My original sample had mirrors on all four sides, on the two exterior walls and on the top and the bottom. However, I don't feel like it's necessary to have the mirrors on the top and the bottom, so instead I am going to cover them with a layer of cardstock and then paint it blue to match the sky. And I'm hoping this will work, but if it doesn't, and later on when I'm installing everything in place, I realize, no, the mirrors really need to be there, I do have enough of the mirror material to cover the top and bottom if I need to. I added the cardstock on with glue, let it dry, and then to make sure it perfectly matched up with the edge, I used a sanding stick to get rid of the excess paper. Thankfully, the blue that I used for Saturn's sky was straight out of the bottle, so I don't have to try and mix and match any special paint. So I'm just going to straight paint onto the cardstock. It is going to warp a little bit, but honestly, you won't be able to see it very well at all, so I'm not worried. I also had the blue paint go down the sides just a little bit, just in case I mess up cutting the mirror in some way. We're covered on the color of the side of the box. I removed the masking tape from the back wall, made sure that my surface was clean, and now I'm going to add the mirror. Now I will add this mirror that I purchased down in the description box if you're looking to find an easy to cut yet very sturdy mirror. I was pretty impressed with this product. It was expensive for the amount that you get, but it does hold its own, unlike my mirror paper that wrinkles on any surface. I traced out the size that the mirror needs to be and then carefully used my craft knife to cut it. It did take quite a few swipes because this is a thicker material and it was a little bit slippery with my cork-backed ruler. There we go, I can say it. And so just be mindful of that. If you do get some of this stuff and you try cutting it, it is a bit slippery. Even though this mirror sticks on its own, some reviews said that the stickiness let go eventually, so I am adding some glue here and there to make sure that it does take hold. I'm leaving the protective film on the surface as I'm gluing it in place in case I get any glue on my fingers, or just in general keeping the mirror clean. I'm trying to make sure that my mirror lines up perfectly with the back of the door frame and covers all of my edges. If there are any edges that are showing outside of the mirror's surface, it may give away the trick. Here's the very satisfying removal of the film from the outside of the mirrors. I tried to do it just before I put it into the space because I know I'm going to get fingerprints on it, but I do hope that it cleans really well with like a soft cloth if I do get fingerprints on it. So here we go, let's put it into the space. For those of you that are new, welcome to Saturn. This is the Saturn scene that I have been working on in several videos. And here is the mirror trick where I'm trying to make it look as though this door is floating, yet you can see the hallway inside. Now it is going to take a little bit of practice to get the mirrors lined up correctly with the wall. If there's any gaps, it's very noticeable. I am going to put the camel in place just for fun, just because I had to see it, and I can't fit myself and the camera and the light all in one place, so you'll have to hold on while I put a few things into this room. I also decided to add some flowers and a watering can, all things that I think might be in this hallway for someone who's going in and out of the door they may want easy access to. And of course, I'm putting the horse in place because I think the horse is just so much more Barbara. It makes so much more sense. And so we're going with the horse. I will try to fix his leg. I do have the leg piece. I'm hoping super glue will assist me with that. And now we can put everything back in place. Let's add our sandworms that we worked on in the last video. I can add in my Saturn rocks, and here is our sandworm scene so far. I think you can see why I need to add a light to the inside of the room. It's very dark compared to everything else, but I think the contrast is so funny. There's just this really calm, quiet farmhouse hallway, and then these black and white, red-eyed snakes, red rocks, crazy colored moons, just all over this scene with yellow sand. Like, it's such a contrast. And my camera did not want to focus on this side of the hallway because of our tall friend. So I'm going to move him out of the way so you can really see around the outside of the hallway. You can give me your opinions. I think it will look a lot better when I don't have a 1, 2, 3 block and a piece of foam board sitting underneath the door. I think it really will look like it's floating in space. But we will have to wait to see what that looks like next week. I'm not going to glue it in place yet until I can get all of my lighting figured out. And I do think lighting is going to be key, because you may be able to tell one side of the hallway is lighter, one side is darker, and I'm going to have to figure that out. So that's all I have for you in today's video. I was hoping I could maybe also get to the sand, but I'm so glad I took my time on creating the hallway, even though it's just like a momentary glimpse into what would have been the Maitland's house. I think it's a fun detail, and those who really love the Beetlejuice movie and love looking for all the references, I think they'll really enjoy it. So that means we will be working on the sand effects in the next video, which will be outside of August. So it will be Beetlegust-tember. We will continue on working on the sand, putting all of the elements together, the worms, the rocks, the door, the hallway, and the lighting. We will get it all working together, and it will be a finished scene. And that will wrap up the final scene in the netherworld that is in the base of my project, which is mind-blowing. I can't believe all the spaces are going to be filled. Thank you again for watching. I hope you had a wonderful Beetlegust month. I really don't know if I got it together enough to post this on the last day of August. You'll have to let me know if I did or not. I'm not sure. But thank you for sticking around. Make sure you're subscribed. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. I always appreciate it. And I will see you in the next one in Beetlegust-tember. Bye. So that means we will be working on the sand in the next video, which will be Beetletober. I'm skipping a whole month. I can't skip September, okay? I got too much to do. I can't reach anything. Phone's ringing. We'll call it Beetlegust. Whoa.